Life without parole. Judge Rosalind Pemberton's gavel cracked against the mahogany bench like a gunshot, her thin lips curling into satisfaction as she watched Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's shoulders stiffen in the defendant's chair. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the courthouse's tall windows illuminated the judge's silver hair and crisp black robes as she leaned forward, savoring the moment. "You had everything handed to you, didn't you, doctor? Full scholarship, prestigious medical career, and you threw it all away for what? Drug trafficking?" Pemberton's voice dripped with contempt as bailiffs moved toward Fatima, their heavy boots echoing across the marble floor. The packed courtroom buzzed with whispers, camera phones capturing every second of what they thought was justice being served. But as the handcuffs clicked around Dr. Al-Hassan's wrists, none of them knew that in 6 hours, Judge Pemberton would be begging this same woman to save her daughter's life. Full scholarship, prestigious medical career, and you threw it all away for what? Drug trafficking? Pemberton's voice dripped with contempt as bailiffs moved toward Fatima, their heavy boots echoing across the marble floor. The packed courtroom buzzed with whispers, camera phones capturing every second of what they thought was justice being served. But as the handcuffs clicked around Dr. Al-Hassan's wrists, none of them knew that in 6 hours, Judge Pemberton would be begging this same woman to save her daughter's life. The packed courtroom buzzed with whispers, camera phones capturing every second of what they thought was justice being served. But as the handcuffs clicked around Dr. Al-Hassan's wrists, none of them knew that in 6 hours, Judge Pemberton would be begging this same woman to save her daughter's life. Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan sat perfectly still in her emerald green blouse and navy blue blazer, her dark eyes focused straight ahead as the courtroom erupted in chaos around her. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across her face, but they couldn't diminish the quiet dignity that seemed to radiate from her very core. At 38, she had spent the last 15 years building a reputation as one of the most brilliant neurosurgeons on the East Coast, her hands steady enough to operate on the most delicate areas of the human brain, her mind sharp enough to pioneer techniques that had saved countless lives. Those same hands now rested calmly in her lap as Judge Pemberton continued her theatrical sentencing, each word designed to strip away not just freedom, but dignity itself. "The charges are severe, Dr. Al-Hassan. Possession with intent to distribute, trafficking across state lines, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. The evidence against you is overwhelming." Pemberton's voice carried across the courtroom with practiced authority, her pale blue eyes never leaving Fatima's face, searching for any crack in her composure. But Fatima had learned long ago that showing emotion in rooms like this was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had learned it during her residency when senior doctors questioned her every decision. She had learned it during her fellowship when colleagues whispered that she only got opportunities because of affirmative action. She had learned it every time a patient's family looked surprised when she walked into the room wearing scrubs instead of a cleaning uniform. The evidence Pemberton referenced so confidently was nothing more than an elaborate lie, a carefully constructed frame job that had begun 6 months earlier during a routine traffic stop. Detective Kevin Sullivan had pulled her over on Route 95, claiming her Mercedes was speeding, though her cruise control had been set at exactly 65 miles per hour. Sullivan was a thick-set man with dead eyes and rough hands that had searched her vehicle with suspicious thoroughness, emerging 20 minutes later with a duffel bag that Fatima had never seen before in her life. Attorney Rachel Goldstein had fought tirelessly to expose the truth, her voice growing hoarse during 3 weeks of testimony as she systematically dismantled the prosecution's case, piece by piece. Rachel was a sharp woman in her 40s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of fierce intelligence that had made her one of the most respected defense attorneys in the state. "Your Honor," she had argued just an hour earlier, Dr. Al-Hassan has spent her entire career saving lives. She volunteers at free clinics, provides pro bono surgical consultations, and has never even had a speeding ticket. Are we really to believe that this woman suddenly became a drug kingpin? The character witnesses had been overwhelming in their support. Dr. Nathan Kowalski, the chief of surgery at Metropolitan General Hospital, had taken the stand in his crisp white coat and blue tie, his Polish accent thick with emotion as he described Fatima's dedication. "She works 18-hour days," he had testified, his weathered face serious under the courtroom's bright lights. "She has performed over 2,000 successful brain surgeries. Last month alone, she saved the lives of 6 children who other doctors said were hopeless cases." Nurse Beverly Mitchell had followed him to the witness stand, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "Dr. Al-Hassan stayed in the hospital for 72 straight hours to monitor a patient who couldn't afford proper aftercare," Beverly had said, her hands folded in her lap. "She slept in the on-call room and bought the family groceries out of her own pocket. That's not the behavior of a criminal." But Judge Pemberton had dismissed each testimony with barely concealed irritation, her fingers drumming against the bench as if she were merely waiting for the charade to end. The judge's bias had been obvious from the first day of trial, her questions sharp and leading when directed at Fatima's witnesses, her tone respectful and encouraging when addressing the prosecution. District Attorney Gregory Ashworth had noticed it too, his confident smile growing wider with each ruling that went in his favor. Ashworth was a political creature, his every move calculated for maximum public impact. He wore expensive suits that fit his lean frame perfectly, his silver hair styled in a way that looked effortless, but probably cost more than most people made in a week. This case, he had told reporters on the courthouse steps, sends a message that no one is above the law, not even those who hide behind prestigious degrees and charitable work. But the real architect of Fatima's downfall sat in the back of the courtroom, his uniform crisp and his expression carefully neutral. Detective Kevin Sullivan watched the proceedings with the satisfied air of a man who had done his job well, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He had testified with practiced confidence about the traffic stop, the search, the discovery of nearly 2 kilograms of cocaine and fentanyl in a bag that bore none of Fatima's fingerprints, none of her DNA, and no connection to her life whatsoever. The conspiracy went deeper than even Rachel suspected. Sullivan's targeting of Fatima hadn't been random. It had been carefully planned revenge for her testimony 6 months earlier in the police brutality case involving Marcus Thompson, a teenager who had been beaten so badly during an arrest that he suffered permanent brain damage. Fatima had performed the emergency surgery that saved the boy's life, and her medical testimony about the extent of his injuries had led to the conviction of 2 officers in Sullivan's precinct. Now, as Pemberton prepared to bring down her gavel for the final time, Fatima allowed herself one moment to remember what her life had been before this nightmare began. She thought about her research laboratory at the hospital, where she had been developing new techniques for treating brain aneurysms. She thought about her patients, Mrs. Chen, who sent her homemade dumplings every Christmas, Tommy Rodriguez, whose successful tumor removal had allowed him to graduate high school, Sarah Williams, whose daughter was now walking because Fatima had spent 14 hours reconstructing her damaged spinal cord. "The life sentence will be served without the possibility of parole," Pemberton announced, her voice cutting through Fatima's memories like a scalpel. "You have used your position of trust to poison our communities, and you will spend the rest of your life paying for those choices." The judge's satisfaction was palpable, her pale face flushed with the pleasure of what she believed was righteous judgment. Bailiff Douglas Fletcher approached the defendant's table, his keys jangling as he prepared to escort Fatima from the courtroom that had become her tomb. Fletcher was a large man with kind eyes who had worked in the courthouse for over 20 years, and even he seemed uncomfortable with the proceedings he was witnessing. His movements were gentle as he helped Fatima to her feet, his voice barely a whisper as he apologized for what came next. Rachel Goldstein reached out to squeeze Fatima's hand one last time, tears streaming down her face as she promised to continue fighting, to file appeals, to never stop searching for the truth. But they both knew that the system had made its decision, and justice had little to do with it. As Fatima was led past the gallery toward the courtroom's heavy oak doors, she saw faces she recognized from the hospital, colleagues who had taken time off work to support her, nurses who had pooled their money to help pay for her defense, former patients who still believed in her innocence. Their tears and angry whispers followed her down the aisle, a soundtrack of injustice that would haunt everyone present. Judge Pemberton watched the procession with cold satisfaction, already reaching for her calendar to schedule the next case. Court will reconvene at 9 tomorrow morning for the Mitchell arraignment, she announced to court reporter Sandra Novak, who had been transcribing every word of the travesty they had all just witnessed. The judge had no way of knowing that her 16-year-old daughter Emma was at that very moment sitting in her advanced biology class at Riverside Preparatory Academy, developing the headache that would change everything. She couldn't see the future that was racing toward her like a freight train, the phone call that would shatter her world, the desperate drive to the hospital, the moment when she would realize that her daughter's life depended on the mercy of the woman she had just destroyed. As the courthouse doors slammed shut behind Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan, Judge Rosalind Pemberton gathered her robes and prepared to go home to celebrate what she believed was a victory for law and order. But fate, it seemed, had other plans entirely. The harsh overhead fluorescent lights of Metropolitan State Penitentiary cast unforgiving shadows across the concrete walls as the transport van pulled through the reinforced gates. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan sat in the back, her wrists still bearing the red marks from the handcuffs that had bound her just hours earlier. The green top and blue jacket she had worn to court now felt like a costume from another life, a life where she had saved patients instead of being branded a criminal. The processing facility buzzed with the mechanical efficiency of a system designed to strip away dignity along with personal belongings. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan moved through each station with quiet composure, her medical training helping her dissociate from the humiliating procedures. Fingerprints, photographs, cavity searches, each step designed to transform Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan from a respected neurosurgeon into prisoner number 847291. Warden Harriet Sinclair appeared as Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan finished changing into her orange prison uniform. The middle-aged woman wore a crisp orange top beneath her blue warden's jacket, her graying hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched her no-nonsense expression. But when she saw Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's face, something shifted in her demeanor. "Dr. Al-Hassan," Warden Sinclair said quietly, her voice carrying an unexpected note of respect. "I know who you are. My mother was one of your patients at the free clinic on Riverside Avenue. You operated on her brain tumor 3 years ago." Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan met the warden's gaze, seeing recognition rather than the cold indifference she had expected. "How is she doing? Cancer-free thanks to you." Warden Sinclair paused, studying Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's face. "I don't know what really happened in that courtroom today, but I've seen enough innocent people come through these doors to recognize another one. You'll have my protection in here, doctor. That's a promise." The walk to cell block C stretched endlessly under the fluorescent lighting that never dimmed, never softened. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's footsteps echoed against the concrete as other inmates watched through their cell bars. Some called out crude remarks, but many simply stared with curiosity at the woman whose case had dominated the local news for weeks. Her cell was a 6x8 concrete box with a narrow cot, a metal toilet, and a small sink that dripped constantly. As the heavy door clanged shut behind her, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her situation. Life without parole. The words echoed in her mind as she sat on the thin mattress, staring at her hands that had once performed miracles in operating rooms and were now confined to this cage. The conspiracy that had led her here unfolded in her memory like a medical case she was trying to diagnose. It had started 8 months ago when she testified in the excessive force case against Detective Kevin Sullivan. Officer Marcus Williams had been beaten nearly to death during a traffic stop, suffering severe brain trauma that required Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's surgical expertise. She had saved the young black man's life and then testified truthfully about the extent of his injuries, contradicting the police report that claimed he had resisted arrest. Detective Kevin Sullivan's cold blue eyes had locked with hers across the courtroom that day, promising retribution with a look that chilled her to the bone. The lawsuit had cost the city $2 million and Sullivan a commendation he had been expecting. From that moment, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan realized she had been marked for destruction. The frame-up had been methodical and clever, a routine traffic stop that wasn't routine at all. Detective Kevin Sullivan's practiced surprise at finding a bag of cocaine in her trunk, the planted evidence that would have been impossible for her to detect until it was too late. Her spotless record and sterling reputation meant nothing against the word of a decorated detective and the bias of a corrupt judge. 20 miles away, Judge Rosalind Pemberton was celebrating in the marble-columned luxury of her Beacon Hill mansion. The evening light streaming through her floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated expensive artwork and antique furniture that spoke of old money and older prejudices. She had changed from her judicial robes into an elegant red silk blouse and tailored black slacks, her silver hair perfectly styled, as she poured herself a glass of Dom Perignon. The crystal glass caught the light as she raised it in a private toast to her own reflection in the ornate mirror above her fireplace. "To cleaning up the streets," she murmured, savoring both the champagne and her sense of accomplishment. In her mind, she had done the city a service by removing Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan from her pedestal. Too many people had looked up to the young surgeon, seeing her as some kind of symbol of what their kind could achieve with enough ambition. Judge Rosalind Pemberton's phone buzzed with a text from District Attorney Gregory Ashworth. "Excellent work today, Rosalind. One less troublemaker to worry about. The foundation donors will be pleased." She smiled as she typed her reply. "My pleasure, Gregory. Dr. Al-Hassan won't be inspiring any more of her people to think they can challenge the system." The Foundation for Metropolitan Excellence was their code name for a network of wealthy donors who funded political campaigns in exchange for favorable rulings and policies. Dr. Byster, Fatima Al-Hassan's free clinics, her vocal advocacy for police reform, and her growing influence in the black community had made her a target worth eliminating. The cocaine in her car had been provided by the same dealers who paid the foundation's members to look the other way. Judge Rosalind Pemberton scrolled through news articles about the sentencing on her tablet, reading comments from outraged supporters of Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan with satisfaction. Let them rage, she thought. Their hero was behind bars where she belonged, and there was nothing they could do about it. Back in her cell, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan was surprised by a gentle knock on her bars. An elderly black woman in an orange prison uniform stood outside, her weathered face kind despite the harsh lighting. "Dr. Al-Hassan? I'm Dorothy Washington. You saved my grandson's life 2 years ago when he was shot in that drive-by on Martin Luther King Boulevard. Doctors at County General said he wouldn't make it, but you performed surgery for 8 hours straight." Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan remembered the case. 13-year-old Jerome Washington caught in gang crossfire, A bullet lodged near his brainstem. She had worked through the night to extract it without causing paralysis. How is Jerome doing? On a roll every semester since then. Wants to be a doctor just like you. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. What they did to you in that courtroom was wrong, doctor. Everyone in here knows it. We got your back. More inmates gathered near her cell as word spread. Maria Santos, whose diabetic mother, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan, had treated when no other doctor would take charity cases. Angela Davis, named after the activist, whose sister's brain tumor, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan, had successfully removed despite the family's inability to pay. Keisha Johnson, whose premature twin babies Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan had consulted on when their tiny skulls needed surgical intervention. Each woman shared a story of Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's compassion and skill. Stories of a doctor who saw patients instead of payment schedules, who worked in community clinics on weekends, who testified truthfully even when it meant making powerful enemies. They put you here because you scared them, Dorothy said, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had seen decades of systemic injustice. A successful black woman with influence and integrity. That's their worst nightmare. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan felt something she hadn't experienced since her arrest. Hope. Not for her own freedom, but for the knowledge that her work had mattered. These women, society's forgotten and discarded, remembered every kindness she had shown. Judge Rosalind Pemberton could take her freedom, but she couldn't erase the lives Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan had saved, or the respect she had earned. As night fell and the inmates returned to their cells, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan lay on her narrow cot, staring at the ceiling where fluorescent lights continued to buzz overhead. She thought about the Hippocratic oath she had taken. First, do no harm. Even here, surrounded by concrete and steel, that promise still meant everything to her. Judge Rosalind Pemberton fell asleep in her silk sheets, dreaming of commendations and campaign contributions. She had no idea that 20 miles away, the woman she had destroyed was already planning how to continue healing people from behind prison walls. Some defeats, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan realized, were just new ways to serve others. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless tune as both women slept, unaware that fate was already preparing to bring them together in ways neither could imagine. Justice had been perverted, but it had not been destroyed. Sometimes it just needed an unexpected catalyst to set things right. The crystal chandelier cast prismatic light across the white tablecloth as Judge Rosalind Pemberton raised her wine glass in triumph. The exclusive Metropolitan Club's dining room buzzed with the quiet conversations of the city's elite, their voices mixing with the gentle clink of expensive silverware against fine china. Natural light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the satisfied smile on her face as she savored her victory. To justice served, she declared to her dining companion, District Attorney Gregory Ashworth, who sat across from her in his tailored navy suit. The afternoon sun highlighted the smugness in her expression as she took another sip of the vintage Bordeaux they'd ordered to celebrate. "You handled that beautifully, Rosalind," Gregory said, cutting into his perfectly prepared steak. "That woman needed to be put in her place. These activist doctors think they can testify against our officers and face no consequences. Well, she learned otherwise today." Judge Rosalind Pemberton's red silk blouse caught the light as she leaned back in her chair, basking in the praise. The burgundy fabric complemented her black slacks, and she'd chosen the outfit specifically to project power and authority even outside the courtroom. Everything about this moment felt perfect. The conspiracy had worked flawlessly. Detective Kevin Sullivan had done his job planting the evidence. Gregory had prosecuted with theatrical conviction, and she had delivered the crushing blow that would silence Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan forever. "Life without parole," she mused, swirling the wine in her glass. "I almost gave her the death penalty, but I decided living with the knowledge that she'll never practice medicine again would be more fitting." She'll rot in that cell, knowing her brilliant career is over. The maitre d' approached their table discreetly, his polished shoes silent on the plush carpet. "Judge Pemberton, I apologize for the interruption, but you have an urgent phone call. The caller said it was a medical emergency involving your daughter." Judge Rosalind Pemberton's hand froze halfway to her lips, the wine glass trembling slightly. Emma. Her 16-year-old daughter should be in chemistry class right now at Pemberton Academy, the elite private school where she excelled in every subject. A cold dread began to form in the pit of her stomach, but she forced herself to remain composed. "Thank you, James. I'll take it at the front desk." Her heels clicked urgently across the marble floor as she followed the maître d' to the reception area. The ornate phone felt heavy in her hand as she lifted it to her ear. "This is Judge Pemberton." "Judge Pemberton, this is Dr. Sarah Martinez from Metropolitan General Hospital. Your daughter Emma collapsed during class and was brought to our emergency department. You need to come immediately." The words hit her like physical blows. The elegant dining room seemed to spin around her as she gripped the phone tighter. What happened? Is she conscious? What's wrong with her? She's stable for now, but unconscious. We're running tests to determine the cause. Please come as quickly as possible. Judge Rosalind Pemberton's mind raced as she hung up the phone. Emma had seemed fine that morning, complaining only of a slight headache as she gathered her books for school. She dismissed it as stress from her upcoming advanced placement exams. How could this be happening? Not today. Not when everything was going so perfectly. She rushed back to the table where Gregory was finishing his meal, oblivious to the crisis unfolding. "I have to go. Emma's in the hospital." "What? What happened?" "I don't know yet. She collapsed at school." Judge Rosalind Pemberton grabbed her purse and jacket, her hands shaking as she fumbled for her car keys. The triumph of the morning felt like a distant memory, replaced by a mother's primal fear. The drive to Metropolitan General Hospital passed in a blur of red lights and honking horns as she navigated through downtown traffic with reckless urgency. Every minute felt like an eternity. Emma was her only child, the center of her world, the reason she worked so hard to climb the social and professional ladder. The thought of losing her daughter made everything else seem meaningless. The hospital's emergency department was a stark contrast to the elegant restaurant she'd left behind. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, mixing with natural light that streamed through skylights in the modern medical facility. The antiseptic smell and constant beeping of monitors created an atmosphere of controlled chaos as medical staff moved efficiently between curtained treatment areas. Judge Rosalind Pemberton approached the nurse's station, still wearing her red blouse and black slacks, though now they felt inappropriate for the sterile medical environment. "I'm Judge Rosalind Pemberton. My daughter Emma was brought in." The nurse, a young woman in teal scrubs, checked her computer screen. "Room 7. Dr. Martinez is with her now." Judge Rosalind Pemberton's heart pounded as she followed the directions through the maze of medical equipment and busy staff members. The bright overhead lighting cast everything in sharp relief, making the urgency of the situation feel even more intense. She pushed through the curtain to find her daughter lying motionless on the hospital bed. Emma looked so small and fragile against the white sheets, her vibrant personality completely absent. The red hospital gown she wore seemed to emphasize how pale her skin had become. Monitors beeped steadily around her bed, their digital displays showing numbers that meant nothing to Judge Rosalind Pemberton, but everything to the medical team surrounding her daughter. "Mrs. Pemberton," Dr. Martinez approached, a middle-aged Latina woman whose tired eyes reflected the gravity of the situation. "I'm glad you're here. We've completed our initial scans and I need to discuss Emma's condition with you." "What's wrong with her?" Judge Rosalind Pemberton moved to her daughter's bedside, taking Emma's limp hand in hers. The skin felt cool and unresponsive. "Emma has suffered a massive brain aneurysm. It's a weakened area in one of the blood vessels in her brain that has ballooned and ruptured. The bleeding has created dangerous pressure inside her skull. The words seem to echo in Judge Rosalind Pemberton's mind without fully registering. Brain aneurysm, ruptured, dangerous pressure. Each term felt like another nail in a coffin she couldn't accept was being built. But she's only 16. She's healthy. She plays tennis. She gets straight A's. How is this possible? Aneurysms can occur at any age, though they're rare in teenagers. Sometimes they're congenital, present from birth but not symptomatic until they rupture. The important thing now is that Emma needs surgery immediately. As if summoned by their conversation, an elderly Asian woman approached the bed. Her gray hair was pulled back in a professional bun, and she wore the blue jacket that designated her as a senior attending physician. The natural light from the skylights overhead illuminated the concern in her weathered features. Judge Pemberton, I'm Dr. Vivian Cheng, the head of neurosurgery here at Metropolitan General. Dr. Martinez asked me to consult on your daughter's case. Judge Rosalind Pemberton studied the older woman's face, searching for reassurance that she didn't find. You can fix this, right? You can save her. Dr. Vivian Cheng's expression remained carefully neutral, the kind of practiced composure that came from decades of delivering difficult news to desperate families. Emma's aneurysm is in a particularly challenging location. The bleeding has created significant complications, and the repair required is one of the most complex procedures in neurosurgery. I want to be completely honest with you about the risks involved. What are you saying exactly? Judge Rosalind Pemberton's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. Several nurses glanced in their direction, but the steady hum of medical activity continued around them. I'm saying that this type of repair requires a level of expertise that only a handful of surgeons worldwide possess. The success rate is extremely low, even under the best circumstances. Emma's case is particularly complex because of the aneurysm's location and the amount of bleeding that has already occurred. Judge Rosalind Pemberton felt the floor seem to shift beneath her feet. Then get one of those surgeons. Call them now. I don't care what it costs or where they are. Get them here immediately. Dr. Vivian Cheng nodded, understanding. I've already begun making calls. Dr. Robert Chen in Boston is in surgery and won't be available for 12 hours. Dr. Amanda Foster in Los Angeles can't travel due to her own medical issues. Dr. Michael Brennan in Chicago is attending a conference in Europe. There has to be someone else. Call Johns Hopkins. Call the Mayo Clinic. Call everyone. Judge Rosalind Pemberton's voice cracked with desperation as she squeezed Emma's unresponsive hand tighter. I understand your urgency, and we're exploring every option. However, time is critical. Emma's brain is swelling from the bleeding, and we have perhaps 6 to 8 hours before the damage becomes irreversible. Even if we can stop the bleeding, the fluorescent lights above seemed to flicker with Judge Rosalind Pemberton's heartbeat as the reality of the situation crashed over her. 8 hours to find a miracle. 8 hours to save the most important person in her world. The irony wasn't lost on her that this morning she had held the power of life and death over another human being, passing judgment with casual cruelty. Now she was powerless, reduced to begging strangers to save her child. Keep calling, she demanded, her voice hoarse with emotion. Call every hospital, every medical school, every surgeon in the country. Someone has to be able to help her. Dr. Vivian Cheng's expression softened with sympathy. We will continue our search, Judge Pemberton. I promise you that we won't give up. But I need you to understand the severity of the situation so that you can prepare yourself for all possibilities. Judge Rosalind Pemberton stared down at her daughter's peaceful face, so different from the animated teenager who had rushed out the door that morning complaining about her headache. Emma's dreams of attending Harvard Medical School, her plans to change the world, her bright future, all of it hung in the balance while Judge Rosalind Pemberton stood helplessly by her bedside. The beeping of the monitors seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed, each electronic pulse a reminder that time was slipping away. Somewhere in this city, perhaps even in this very hospital, the answer to her prayers might exist. But with each passing minute, Judge Rosalind Pemberton felt her daughter's chances diminishing and her own world crumbling around the edges of a mother's worst nightmare. The harsh fluorescent lights of Metropolitan General Hospital's intensive care unit cast an unforgiving glow across Judge Rosalind Pemberton's face as she stood beside her daughter's bed. Emma lay motionless, connected to a web of monitors and machines that beeped with mechanical precision. The natural light streaming through the tall windows did nothing to soften the stark reality of the situation. Her 16-year-old daughter, who had been laughing with friends at school just hours ago, now fought for her life against an enemy invisible to the naked eye. Dr. Vivian Cheng, an elderly physician whose blue jacket bore the weight of decades of medical experience, adjusted her glasses as she studied Emma's latest brain scans on the illuminated viewing panel. The lines etched deep around her eyes spoke of countless difficult conversations, but Judge Rosalind Pemberton could see something different in her expression today, something that made her stomach clench with dread. "Doctor, you said there might be other options," Judge Rosalind Pemberton pressed, her voice cracking slightly. Her red silk blouse, which she had chosen that morning to celebrate her courtroom victory, now felt like a costume from another lifetime. "Surely someone else can perform this surgery. What about Dr. Martinez from Johns Hopkins? Or that specialist from Mayo Clinic?" Dr. Vivian Cheng removed her glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture that Judge Rosalind Pemberton was beginning to recognize as a stalling tactic. The older woman's shoulders sagged slightly as she turned away from the scans to face the desperate mother. "Mrs. Pemberton, I've been practicing neurosurgery for 37 years. Dr. Vivian Cheng began, her voice gentle but firm. "I've seen procedures that seemed impossible become routine, and I've witnessed miracles that defied medical explanation. But Emma's aneurysm is located in one of the most delicate regions of the brain. The arteriovenous malformation has created a situation that requires not just skill, but true artistry." Judge Rosalind Pemberton felt her hands beginning to shake. The monitors continued their relentless beeping, each sound a reminder that time was slipping away. "There has to be someone, anyone. I don't care what it costs." "This isn't about money," Dr. Vivian Cheng replied softly. "This is about expertise that can't be bought. The procedure Emma needs, the microsurgical repair of a deep-seated cerebral aneurysm with concurrent AVM resection, has only been successfully performed by a handful of surgeons worldwide." The words hit Judge Rosalind Pemberton like physical blows. She gripped the metal railing of Emma's bed, her knuckles white against the cold steel. "Then call them, all of them. I don't care if we have to fly someone in from across the world." Dr. Vivian Cheng's expression grew even more grave. "I already have. Dr. Martinez is in emergency surgery for the next 12 hours. The specialist from Mayo Clinic suffered a stroke last month and is still recovering. The surgeon from Mount Sinai attempted this procedure twice and lost both patients. Emma doesn't have time for second best, and frankly, I won't risk her life on anything less than absolute expertise." Judge Rosalind Pemberton felt the room spinning around her. The bright hospital lights seemed to blur together, creating a kaleidoscope of panic in her vision. "Then what are you telling me? That my daughter is going to die because no one can save her?" "I'm not saying that," Dr. Vivian Cheng said quietly. "But I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. There is one surgeon who could perform this procedure, someone who has not only mastered the technique, but actually pioneered several of the approaches we would need to use." Hope flared in Judge Rosalind Pemberton's chest like a match struck in darkness. "Who? Where are they? Can we get them here?" Dr. Vivian Cheng hesitated, her weathered hands clasping and unclasping in front of her blue jacket. "The surgeon I'm referring to is Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan," She's published extensively on this exact type of aneurysm repair. Her success rate is unprecedented, and her innovative microsurgical techniques have saved dozens of patients who were considered inoperable. The name hit Judge Rosalind Pemberton like a sledgehammer to the chest. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process the impossibility of what she had just heard. The fluorescent lights above seemed to flicker, or perhaps it was her vision failing as the full weight of cosmic irony crashed down upon her. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible above the mechanical symphony of Emma's life support systems. "No, that's not possible." Dr. Vivian Cheng frowned, clearly confused by Judge Rosalind Pemberton's reaction. "I understand this is overwhelming, but Dr. Al-Hassan truly is our best option. Unfortunately, she's currently unavailable, but I'm hoping we might be able to reach her." "Unavailable," Judge Rosalind Pemberton repeated, her voice hollow. The word tasted like ashes in her mouth. She knew exactly how unavailable Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan was. She had personally ensured it with the swing of her gavel just hours before. "Do you know Dr. Al-Hassan?" Dr. Vivian Cheng asked, noting the strange pallor that had overtaken Judge Rosalind Pemberton's face. Judge Rosalind Pemberton's legs felt weak, and she reached for a nearby chair, sinking into it as if her bones had suddenly turned to water. The red fabric of her blouse seemed to mock her now, a scarlet reminder of the blood on her hands. "Where exactly is Dr. Al-Hassan?" she managed to ask. "That's the frustrating part," Dr. Vivian Cheng replied, shaking her head. "I've been trying to reach her all afternoon, but her office says she's dealing with a personal emergency. Her surgical coordinator mentioned something about legal troubles, but they were very vague. It's completely out of character for her to be unreachable during a medical crisis." Judge Rosalind Pemberton closed her eyes, and behind her eyelids, she saw Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's face as the bailiff had led her away in handcuffs. The dignity in those dark eyes, the quiet grace with which she had accepted an unjust sentence. The woman who could save Emma's life was sitting in a prison cell because of her. "Legal troubles?" Judge Rosalind Pemberton echoed weakly. "Yes, apparently something serious enough to keep her from her practice," Dr. Vivian Cheng continued, oblivious to Judge Rosalind Pemberton's internal collapse. "It's such a shame, really. Dr. Al-Hassan has devoted her entire career to helping people. She's performed countless surgeries pro bono, particularly for underserved communities. I can't imagine what kind of legal issue could be serious enough to sideline someone of her caliber." Each word was another twist of the knife in Judge Rosalind Pemberton's conscience. She remembered the character witnesses who had spoken on Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's behalf, the colleagues who had testified to her integrity, the patients whose lives she had saved. Judge Rosalind Pemberton had dismissed them all, choosing instead to believe the fabricated evidence that painted this healing angel as a criminal. "Dr. Cheng," Judge Rosalind Pemberton said, her voice barely above a whisper, "if we could locate Dr. Al-Hassan, if we could bring her here, how quickly could she operate?" Dr. Vivian Cheng consulted her watch, and Judge Rosalind Pemberton noticed how the fluorescent lights caught the concern in her eyes. "Emma's condition is deteriorating rapidly. The pressure in her brain is increasing despite our interventions. Ideally, we need to get her into surgery within the next few hours, 6 at the absolute maximum." And without the surgery, the silence that followed was answer enough. Dr. Vivian Cheng's expression said what her words could not. Emma would die, and it would be Judge Rosalind Pemberton's fault in more ways than she could have ever imagined. "Dr. Cheng, I need to make some phone calls," Judge Rosalind Pemberton said, standing on unsteady legs. "Is there somewhere private I can go?" "Of course. You can use the family consultation room down the hall. But Mrs. Pemberton, I have to ask, do you have some way of contacting Dr. Al-Hassan? Because if you do, Emma's life may depend on it." Judge Rosalind Pemberton looked back at her daughter, whose peaceful face gave no indication of the battle raging inside her young brain. Emma's red hospital gown seemed to glow under the harsh lights, a color that now reminded Judge Rosalind Pemberton of blood, of guilt, of the consequences of her own prejudice and corruption. "I may have a way to reach her," Judge Rosalind Pemberton said, each word feeling like broken glass in her throat. "But Dr. Cheng, there are complications you need to understand. Dr. Al-Hassan's legal troubles, they're more serious than you know." Dr. Vivian Cheng's eyebrows rose in concern. What kind of complications? Judge Rosalind Pemberton felt the full weight of her actions pressing down on her like a physical force. The bright hospital lights seemed to expose every shadow of her soul, every corner where she had hidden her racism and ambition, the kind that may make it impossible for her to help us, even if she wanted to. As she walked toward the consultation room, Judge Rosalind Pemberton felt as though she were walking toward her own judgment day. The woman she had condemned to life in prison was the only person who could save her daughter's life. The irony was so complete, so devastatingly perfect, that it almost seemed like divine intervention. Behind her, the monitors continued their mechanical vigil over Emma's failing body, counting down the minutes until Judge Rosalind Pemberton would have to confront the magnitude of her mistakes and somehow find a way to undo the irreversible. The harsh fluorescent lights of the state penitentiary's visiting room cast everything in stark, unforgiving brightness. The overhead lighting mixed with natural daylight streaming through reinforced windows created an atmosphere where nothing could hide, where every emotion played out in brutal clarity. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan sat at the metal table in her orange prison uniform, her posture straight despite the circumstances, maintaining the dignity that had defined her throughout her distinguished career. The heavy door opened with a mechanical click, and Judge Rosalind Pemberton entered. Gone were the imposing black robes of judicial authority. Instead, she wore a red blouse that seemed to amplify her distress, the color highlighting the pallor of her face and the tremor in her hands. Her usually perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and her makeup showed signs of hurried application over tear-stained cheeks. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan looked up as her former judge approached, her dark eyes steady and unreadable. The woman who had sentenced her to life in prison just hours earlier now stood before her as a desperate mother, stripped of all pretense and power. The role reversal was so complete, so dramatic, that it seemed like something from a fever dream. Judge Rosalind Pemberton hesitated at the table, her hand gripping the back of the metal chair as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her mouth opened, then closed, words failing her completely. How do you ask for help from someone whose life you've just destroyed? How do you bridge the chasm of injustice you've created with a simple request? Judge Pemberton, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan said quietly, her voice carrying none of the deference typically shown to judicial authority. "This is unexpected." The simple words seemed to break something inside Judge Rosalind Pemberton. She collapsed into the chair across from Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan, her composed judicial mask finally cracking completely. "My daughter," she whispered, her voice barely audible under the humming fluorescent lights. "Emma. She's at Metropolitan General. She has a brain aneurysm." Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Medical training was deeply ingrained, an automatic response to human suffering that transcended personal grievances. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said carefully. Judge Rosalind Pemberton leaned forward desperately. "They say she needs surgery immediately, a complex procedure. The doctors, they all say the same thing." Her voice broke. "They say there's only one surgeon who can save her life." The weight of the unspoken truth hung between them in the bright visiting room. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan understood immediately why Judge Rosalind Pemberton was here, why the woman who had shown such callous disregard for justice was now sitting across from her with tears streaming down her face. "You," Judge Rosalind Pemberton whispered, "they say you're the only one who can perform this surgery. The technique you developed, the research you've done. Without you, Emma will die." Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan sat back in her chair, processing the cruel irony of the situation. The universe had delivered a twist so profound, so dramatically perfect, that it defied belief. "Let me understand this correctly," she said, her voice measured and clinical. "You sentenced me to life in prison for crimes I didn't commit, and now you want me to save your daughter's life?" Judge Rosalind Pemberton flinched as if struck. "I know how this looks. I know what I've done to you. But please, she's just a child. She's innocent in all of this, and I was innocent too." Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan replied, her voice gaining strength. "But that didn't matter to you, did it? When I stood in your courtroom, when my lawyer presented evidence of my character, when colleagues testified about my dedication to helping others, you dismissed it all. You saw what you wanted to see." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as silence stretched between them. Judge Rosalind Pemberton's hands shook as she wiped tears from her face, smearing her makeup further. "You're right. I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong." "Wrong?" Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's composure cracked slightly, revealing the pain beneath. "I dedicated my life to saving people. I worked in underserved communities, provided free care to those who couldn't afford it. I testified against police brutality because I took an oath to do no harm. And for that, you sentenced me to die in prison." Judge Rosalind Pemberton's sobs echoed in the stark visiting room. I know what I've done. The corruption, the prejudice, the way I let my biases cloud my judgment. I destroyed an innocent woman's life, and now that same woman is my daughter's only hope." Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan studied Judge Rosalind Pemberton's face, searching for sincerity behind the desperation. "Tell me about Emma's condition. What exactly are the symptoms? When did the aneurysm rupture?" Despite her emotional state, Judge Rosalind Pemberton recognized the shift in Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's tone. The surgeon was emerging, the healer who couldn't ignore suffering, even when it belonged to her enemy's family. "She collapsed at school around noon. They said it was a massive hemorrhage in her brain. The aneurysm is in a location that makes surgery extremely dangerous." "Which vessel?" Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan asked, her medical training taking over despite the circumstances. "The anterior communicating artery," they said. Dr. Cheng explained that you pioneered a technique for this specific type of repair. "Emma's been unconscious for hours. They said without surgery, she'll die before morning." Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan closed her eyes, visualizing the complex procedure. She had indeed developed innovative approaches for anterior communicating artery aneurysms, publishing papers that had become standard reference materials worldwide. The technique required precise microsurgical skills and years of specialized experience. "Even if I agreed to help," Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan said slowly, "how would that work? I'm a convicted felon now. I can't practice medicine. No hospital would allow me to operate." Judge Rosalind Pemberton leaned forward desperately. "There has to be a way. Emergency privileges, some kind of exception. I'll call the governor, the medical board, anyone who can make this happen. The same system that convicted me an innocent woman is now supposed to trust me to save a life?" Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan shook her head. "The irony is overwhelming." The visiting room door opened, and Warden Harriet Sinclair entered, her middle-aged frame clothed in an orange top and blue jacket that marked her authority within these walls. She approached the table with curiosity and concern, having been informed of the unusual visit. "Dr. Al-Hassan," Warden Harriet Sinclair said respectfully, "Judge Pemberton, I understand there's an emergency situation involving a medical procedure." Judge Rosalind Pemberton turned to the warden with desperate hope. "My daughter is dying. Dr. Al-Hassan is the only surgeon who can save her life." There must be some way to arrange emergency medical privileges. Warden Harriet Sinclair looked between them, understanding the gravity of the situation. This is unprecedented. A convicted felon performing surgery would require approvals from multiple agencies, the medical board, insurance companies, the hospital administration. How long would that take? Judge Rosalind Pemberton asked frantically. Days, maybe weeks. Warden Harriet Sinclair replied honestly. The bureaucracy alone would be impossible to navigate in time. Judge Rosalind Pemberton's face went white. Emma doesn't have days. She has hours. The visiting room door opened again, and attorney Rachel Goldstein entered wearing a professional Navy suit. She carried a briefcase and wore the expression of someone who had been working frantically behind the scenes. Her presence brought a glimmer of hope to the impossible situation. Judge Pemberton, attorney Rachel Goldstein said with barely concealed hostility, I never expected to see you here, especially not asking favors from my client. Judge Rosalind Pemberton looked up at the defense attorney who had fought so passionately for Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's innocence. Ms. Goldstein, I know you have every reason to hate me, but my daughter is dying. Dr. Al-Hassan is her only hope. Attorney Rachel Goldstein set her briefcase on the table with a sharp click. Let me be very clear about something, Judge Pemberton. My client was wrongfully convicted in your courtroom. The evidence was fabricated. The prosecution was corrupt, and you showed clear bias throughout the proceedings. Now you want her to save your child's life? Yes, Judge Rosalind Pemberton whispered. Yes, I do. Attorney Rachel Goldstein looked at Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan, seeking guidance from her client. Fatima, this is your decision entirely. No one would blame you for walking away from this situation. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan sat quietly for a long moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The Hippocratic oath she had taken years ago echoed in her mind. First, do no harm, help the sick, preserve life. Those principles had guided her entire career, leading her to work in dangerous neighborhoods and provide care to those society had forgotten. Tell me more about Emma's current status. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan said to Judge Rosalind Pemberton, What's her Glasgow Coma Scale score? Has there been any deterioration in her neurological function? Judge Rosalind Pemberton struggled to remember the medical details through her panic. Dr. Cheng said her score was declining, something about increased intracranial pressure. They're trying to manage it with medications, but she said it's only buying time. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan nodded grimly. The window for surgical intervention is closing rapidly. Even if we could overcome the legal obstacles, transportation time, surgical preparation, it would be cutting it extremely close. But it's possible? Judge Rosalind Pemberton asked with desperate hope. Medically, yes. The procedure I developed has a high success rate for this type of aneurysm. But the circumstances are unlike anything I've ever encountered. Operating while technically a prisoner, with all the stress and complications that brings. Attorney Rachel Goldstein opened her briefcase and pulled out legal documents. I've been researching emergency medical exceptions. There are provisions for humanitarian situations, cases where someone's specialized skills are needed to prevent loss of life. It would require multiple waivers and approvals, but theoretically, it could be done. Warden Harriet Sinclair studied the documents. The liability issues alone are staggering. If something goes wrong during surgery, who's responsible? The hospital, the prison system, the state. My daughter is going to die without this surgery, Judge Rosalind Pemberton said, her voice breaking completely. I don't care about liability or bureaucracy. I just want her to live. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan looked at the woman who had destroyed her life, now completely broken and vulnerable. The balance of power had shifted so dramatically that it seemed like cosmic justice. Yet as she watched Judge Rosalind Pemberton's desperation, she felt no satisfaction, only the familiar call to heal. If I agree to this, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan said slowly, I have conditions. Judge Rosalind Pemberton nodded eagerly. Anything. Name it. First, Attorney Goldstein documents everything. Every conversation, every admission, every detail of how this conviction was achieved. I want a full record of the corruption that put me here. Done. Judge Rosalind Pemberton agreed immediately. Second, I want your word that you'll cooperate fully in overturning this wrongful conviction. No legal maneuvering, no political games, just the truth. Judge Rosalind Pemberton met Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's eyes. I swear it. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan turned to attorney Rachel Goldstein. What are the practical steps? How do we make this happen legally? Attorney Rachel Goldstein was already pulling forms from her briefcase. Emergency medical waivers, temporary licensure reinstatement, hospital privileges under extraordinary circumstances. I'll need Judge Pemberton to sign affidavits, use her judicial contacts to expedite approvals. I'll make every call necessary, Judge Rosalind Pemberton promised. The hospital board, the medical licensing board, the governor's office if needed. Warden Harriet Sinclair shook her head in amazement. In 30 years of corrections work, I've never seen anything like this. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan stood up from the metal table, her orange prison uniform a stark reminder of the injustice she had endured. If we're going to do this, we need to move immediately. Every minute we delay reduces Emma's chances of survival. Judge Rosalind Pemberton rose as well, hope and desperation warring in her expression. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for being a better person than I am. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan looked at her former judge with a mixture of anger and pity. I'm not doing this for you, Judge Pemberton. I'm doing it because a child's life hangs in the balance, and I took an oath to preserve life regardless of the circumstances. The fluorescent lights continued to buzz overhead as the unlikely group prepared to attempt the impossible. In the stark brightness of the prison visiting room, a wrongfully convicted surgeon was about to try to save the daughter of the woman who had destroyed her life. The irony was overwhelming, but Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's commitment to her medical calling transcended personal grievances. As they prepared to leave the visiting room, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan felt the familiar surge of determination that had carried her through medical school, residency, and years of complex surgeries. Emma Pemberton was just another patient who needed her help, and despite everything that had happened, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan would give her the same exceptional care she had always provided. The next few hours would test everyone involved in ways they never could have imagined. The fluorescent lights in the prison meeting room cast harsh shadows across the table as Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan sat in her orange uniform, her dark eyes studying Judge Rosalind Pemberton's tear-stained face. The judge's red blouse was wrinkled from hours of desperate pleading, her usual composed demeanor completely shattered. I'll do it, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. But I have conditions. Judge Rosalind Pemberton's head snapped up, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time since arriving at the prison. Anything, name it. Attorney Rachel Goldstein leaned forward, her briefcase already open on the table. She wore a professional navy blazer and matching skirt, her expression focused and determined. First condition, you admit on record that Dr. Al-Hassan's conviction was based on fabricated evidence. Every word you say will be documented and witnessed. I don't understand. You understand perfectly. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan interrupted, her voice steady despite the turmoil of the past 24 hours. You sentenced an innocent woman to life in prison. If you want me to save your daughter, you'll acknowledge that truth. Warden Harriet Sinclair, who had been standing silently by the door in her orange top and blue jacket, stepped forward. Judge Pemberton, I've seen a lot of people come through these doors. Dr. Al-Hassan isn't one who belongs here. We all know it. Judge Rosalind Pemberton's hands trembled as she looked around the room. The bright overhead lighting seemed to expose every line of guilt etched into her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I admit it. The evidence was fabricated. Detective Sullivan presented me with what I now believe were planted drugs. I sentenced Dr. Al-Hassan knowing there were inconsistencies in the case." Rachel Goldstein's pen moved rapidly across her legal pad, capturing every word. "Continue. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment. I saw a successful black woman and I wanted to bring her down." The words came out in broken sobs. "I violated my oath as a judge. I violated everything the law stands for." Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan closed her eyes briefly, the admission both vindicating and painful to hear. When she opened them again, her resolve was clear. "Second condition, I operate without these." She raised her shackled hands, the metal chains clinking against the table. "The security protocols." Warden Sinclair began. "I'm performing brain surgery, not planning an escape," Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan said firmly. "I can't save a child's life with my hands bound." Judge Rosalind Pemberton nodded frantically. "Done. Whatever you need." 20 minutes later, a police convoy raced through the streets of downtown Metropolitan General Hospital. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan sat in the back of the transport van, still wearing her orange prison uniform, her wrists now freed from shackles but her ankles still bound. Through the small window, she could see the familiar outline of the hospital, where she had dedicated years of her life to healing others. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was returning as a prisoner to save the daughter of the woman who had destroyed her career. The van pulled up to the emergency entrance, where a team of medical staff waited under the bright natural skylight streaming through the hospital's glass atrium. Dr. Vivian Cheng, the elderly physician in her blue jacket, rushed forward as the transport doors opened. "Fatima," Dr. Cheng breathed, her voice filled with emotion as she saw her colleagues step out in prison garb. "This is impossible. How are you here?" "Long story, Vivian," Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan replied, her professional demeanor already taking over as they entered the hospital. The familiar smell of antiseptic and the sound of medical equipment humming filled her senses. "Tell me about the patient." As they walked quickly through the corridors, under intense fluorescent lighting, Dr. Cheng briefed her on Emma Pemberton's condition. 16-year-old female, massive cerebral aneurysm in the anterior communicating artery. "It's the exact type you've been researching. She's been stable for the past hour, but we're running out of time." Nurses and doctors stopped in their tracks as they recognized Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan, their faces showing confusion and concern at seeing their respected colleague escorted by prison guards. Dr. Nathan Kowalski, wearing his white coat over a green shirt and dark pants, stepped forward. "Fatima, what the hell is going on? We heard about the sentencing, but..." "I'll explain later, Nathan. Right now, I need to see the patient's scans." The medical team gathered around the viewing station, the bright screens displaying Emma Pemberton's brain images. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan studied them with the focused intensity that had made her legendary in neurosurgical circles. Her orange prison uniform stood in stark contrast to the white coat surrounding her, but her expertise commanded immediate respect. "The aneurysm is larger than I expected," she murmured, tracing the abnormal bulge with her finger on the screen. "It's pressing against the optic nerve here, and there's already evidence of minor bleeding. We need to operate immediately." Judge Rosalind Pemberton appeared at the edge of the group, her red blouse now complemented by a matching jacket she had grabbed from her car. Her face was pale as she approached Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan. "Doctor, please tell me you can save her." Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan turned to face the woman who had sentenced her to life in prison just hours earlier. The room fell silent as the two women locked eyes. "I can try, but you need to understand, this is one of the most complex procedures in neurosurgery. Even under ideal conditions, the success rate is only 60%. And under these conditions," Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan gestured to her prison uniform and the guards flanking her. "I've never operated while being treated as a criminal, but I took an oath to do no harm and to heal when I can. That oath doesn't disappear because of what you did to me." 30 minutes later, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan stood in the surgical preparation area, finally freed from her ankle restraints. She had changed into green scrubs and was methodically scrubbing her hands under the bright lights. In the mirror above the sink, she could see Judge Rosalind Pemberton watching from the hallway, escorted by hospital security to keep her at a distance. Nurse Beverly Mitchell, a veteran surgical nurse in her blue scrubs, approached carefully. "Dr. Al-Hassan, I just want you to know, none of us believe what they're saying about you. We've worked with you for years. We know who you are." Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Beverly. That means more than you know." As she entered operating room 3, the intense fluorescent lighting and familiar array of surgical instruments greeted her like old friends. The surgical team was already assembled, their faces showing a mixture of professional focus and personal concern for their colleague's situation. Emma Pemberton lay unconscious on the operating table, her young face peaceful despite the life-threatening condition ravaging her brain. She wore a standard hospital gown in pale blue, her blonde hair partially shaved and prepped for surgery. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan approached the table, her trained eyes already assessing the patient. For a moment, she saw not the daughter of her tormentor, but simply a 16-year-old girl whose life hung in the balance. "Let's begin," she announced, her voice steady and authoritative. Through the observation window above, Judge Rosalind Pemberton pressed her hands against the glass, watching as Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan positioned herself at her daughter's head. The judge's red jacket seemed to glow under the harsh lighting as she witnessed the woman she had wronged preparing to save what mattered most to her in the world. As Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan made the first incision, her mind flashed back to her early days in medical school. She remembered the long hours studying anatomy, the pressure of her first surgery, the moment she decided to specialize in neurosurgery because of its potential to change lives in the most dramatic ways. She remembered her mentor, Dr. James Crawford, an elderly black surgeon who had paved the way for doctors like her. "Surgery isn't just about skill, Fatima," he had told her during her residency. "It's about maintaining your humanity while holding someone's life in your hands." The irony of those words struck her now as she carefully navigated through Emma Pemberton's skull, her movements precise despite the emotional weight of the situation. "Pressure's dropping," announced the anesthesiologist, his voice tense. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan didn't look up from her work. "Increase the vasopressors. She's bleeding more than expected." The surgical team moved with practiced efficiency, each member playing their crucial role in the life-or-death drama unfolding under the bright lights. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's hands moved with the confidence of someone who had performed this procedure dozens of times, but never under circumstances like these. As she approached the aneurysm itself, a bubble of weakened blood vessel that could burst at any moment, she felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with the most critical moments of surgery. One wrong move, one slip of her instruments, and Emma Pemberton would die on the table. Above in the observation deck, Judge Rosalind Pemberton watched in fascination and terror as Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan worked to save her daughter's life. For the first time, she truly understood the skill and dedication of the woman she had sent to prison. Every movement was deliberate, every decision made with years of training and experience guiding her hands. "Clamp," Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan called out, and Nurse Mitchell immediately placed the tiny surgical instrument in her palm. The room held its collective breath as Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan carefully positioned the clip that would seal off the aneurysm, preventing it from rupturing while maintaining blood flow to the surrounding brain tissue. It was a procedure that required not just technical skill, but an almost artistic touch. "There," she whispered as the clip locked into place. "That should hold." But even as she spoke, The monitors began beeping frantically. Emma Pemberton's blood pressure was spiking, and fluid was building up in her brain. "We've got increased intracranial pressure," the anesthesiologist announced urgently. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's jaw tightened as she assessed the complication. This was exactly the kind of unexpected challenge that separated good surgeons from great ones. Operating under normal circumstances, she would have had access to the latest equipment and complete support from her team. But nothing about this situation was normal. "I need a ventricular drain," she said calmly, already calculating her next moves. "We're going to have to relieve the pressure manually." As she worked to address the complication, her mind remained focused solely on the patient before her. The prison uniform she had worn into the hospital, the unjust conviction, even the woman watching desperately from above. None of it mattered now. There was only the surgery, the patient, and her commitment to preserving life. The clock on the operating room wall showed that 3 hours had passed since the first incision. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's scrubs were damp with perspiration, but her hands remained steady as she put the finishing touches on the most important surgery of her career. "Pressure's normalizing," the anesthesiologist reported, relief evident in his voice. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan finally allowed herself a small smile as she began the process of closing Emma Pemberton's skull. Against all odds, despite operating as a convicted prisoner under the most difficult circumstances imaginable, she had done it. The aneurysm was repaired, the bleeding stopped, and the patient was stable. As the surgical team began the closing procedures, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan looked up at the observation window where Judge Rosalind Pemberton still stood vigil. Their eyes met through the glass, and in that moment, both women understood that everything had changed. The surgery was complete, but the real reckoning was just beginning. The operating room blazed under the intense fluorescent lights, every surface gleaming white and sterile as Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan worked with laser precision over Emma Pemberton's exposed brain. Her gloved hands moved with the steady confidence of years of training, despite the shackles that had been removed only moments before surgery began. The aneurysm bulged dangerously against the delicate tissue, a ticking time bomb that required absolute focus and unmatched skill to defuse. "Suction," Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan requested calmly, her voice betraying none of the emotional turmoil she had endured over the past 24 hours. The surgical nurse immediately complied, clearing the microscopic field of view. Every movement was deliberate, every decision critical, as she navigated the treacherous landscape of blood vessels and neural pathways that could determine whether Emma Pemberton would live or die. Above in the observation deck, Judge Rosalind Pemberton pressed her face against the glass, her red blouse wrinkled from hours of anxious waiting. The woman who had sat so smugly on her bench just hours earlier now looked haggard and desperate, watching the steady hands of the surgeon she had wrongfully condemned work to save her daughter's life. The irony was not lost on the medical staff, who whispered among themselves about the unprecedented situation unfolding before their eyes. "Microforceps," Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan called out, extending her hand without looking away from the surgical site. The aneurysm pulsed rhythmically, each heartbeat threatening to rupture the weakened vessel wall. She had performed this procedure countless times, but never under such extraordinary circumstances, never while wearing prison shackles just hours before, never while saving the child of the woman who had destroyed her life. The operating room doors suddenly burst open, flooding the sterile environment with natural daylight from the hospital corridor. Attorney Rachel Goldstein rushed in, still wearing her professional navy suit, her face flushed with excitement and disbelief. She was quickly stopped by security, but not before she called out urgently to the surgical team. "Dr. Al-Hassan has been vindicated. Detective Sullivan has been arrested." The announcement rippled through the operating room like an electric shock. Several nurses gasped, while the anesthesiologist looked up from his monitors in surprise. "But Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan never wavered, never lifted her eyes from Emma Pemberton's brain, never allowed the momentous news to disturb her concentration. Her training had taught her that in the operating room, nothing existed except the patient and the procedure. "Clip applicator," she requested, with the same calm professionalism, as if she hadn't just heard that her innocence had been proven while she fought to save her accuser's daughter. Rachel Goldstein was escorted to the observation deck where Judge Rosalind Pemberton stood frozen in shock. The attorney's hands shook as she unfolded the legal documents that would change everything. The overhead fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the papers as she began to read the devastating revelations that had emerged in the past hour. Detective Kevin Sullivan was arrested 1 hour ago on federal charges of evidence tampering, drug trafficking, and conspiracy, Rachel announced, her voice carrying through the observation room's intercom system. "He's confessed to planting the drugs in Dr. Al-Hassan's vehicle on direct orders from District Attorney Gregory Ashworth." Judge Rosalind Pemberton's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She gripped the observation rail with white knuckles, staring down at the woman she had sentenced to life in prison, the woman who was now performing miracles with her bare hands to save Emma's life. The weight of her participation in this conspiracy crashed down upon her like a physical blow. Below in the operating room, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan continued her delicate work, carefully positioning the titanium clip that would seal the aneurysm and prevent the fatal hemorrhage that threatened Emma's young life. Her movements remained steady and precise, even as the truth of her vindication swirled around the sterile environment like a cleansing wind. "The conspiracy goes deeper than we imagined." Rachel continued reading from the federal documents. "Detective Sullivan has provided evidence that District Attorney Ashworth specifically targeted Dr. Al-Hassan after her testimony in the Marcus Washington police brutality case. They saw her as a threat to their operations and decided to eliminate her credibility by framing her on drug charges." The surgical team exchanged glances of amazement and disgust. They had worked alongside Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan for years, witnessing her dedication to medicine and her commitment to serving the most vulnerable populations. The idea that she could be involved in drug trafficking had never made sense to any of them, but they had been forced to accept the court's judgment. "Perfect placement," Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan murmured to herself as she successfully positioned the clip across the aneurysm's neck. The dangerous bulge was now sealed off from the main arterial system, eliminating the immediate threat to Emma's life. But the surgery was far from over. She needed to ensure that blood flow to the surrounding brain tissue remained intact while confirming that the repair would hold under normal blood pressure. Judge Rosalind Pemberton watched in horrified fascination as the woman she had wronged worked with unwavering dedication to save her daughter. Every precise movement of Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's hands was a rebuke to the judge's prejudice and corruption. Every successful step of the procedure demonstrated the extraordinary skill and character of the person she had tried to destroy. The federal investigation reveals that this conspiracy involved multiple cases, Rachel continued, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. Dr. Al-Hassan was specifically targeted because of her work providing free medical care in underserved communities and her willingness to testify against police misconduct. They viewed her influence as a threat to their corrupt network. News vans were already gathering in the hospital parking lot outside, their satellite dishes extending toward the sky like mechanical flowers seeking sunlight. Word of the dramatic reversal was spreading through social media and news networks with lightning speed. The story of the wrongfully convicted surgeon saving her accuser's daughter while being vindicated of all charges was the kind of narrative that captured the public imagination and demanded justice. Inside the operating room, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan began the painstaking process of closing the surgical site. Each suture was placed with the same meticulous care she had shown throughout the procedure, ensuring that Emma's recovery would be as complete as possible. The bright operating lights illuminated her work like a spotlight on a stage where justice and mercy performed their most profound dance. "Blood pressure is stabilizing," the anesthesiologist reported, with obvious relief. "All vital signs are returning to normal ranges." A collective sigh of relief swept through the operating room as the immediate danger passed. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan had successfully navigated one of the most complex neurosurgical procedures possible, doing so under circumstances that would have broken lesser individuals. Her triumph was not just medical but moral, proving that true character could not be destroyed by false accusations or corrupt systems. Judge Rosalind Pemberton collapsed into a chair in the observation deck, the full magnitude of her actions finally sinking in. She had not merely made an error in judgment, she had actively participated in a conspiracy to destroy an innocent woman whose only crime was standing up for justice and serving her community with distinction. The red blouse she wore seemed to mirror the shame and guilt that now colored every aspect of her existence. Dr. Al-Hassan maintained her focus on saving Emma's life, even while learning of her vindication. One of the surgical nurses observed with obvious admiration, "That's the mark of a true healer." The observation was accurate and profound. While others might have been distracted by the life-changing news of their exoneration, Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan had remained completely devoted to her patients' welfare. Her commitment to the Hippocratic Oath had proven stronger than her desire for personal vindication, demonstrating a level of character that few could match. As Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan removed her surgical gloves and began the post-operative documentation, the reality of her situation finally began to sink in. She was no longer a convicted felon facing life in prison. She was a vindicated professional whose reputation would be restored and whose contributions to medicine would be recognized. But more importantly, she had saved a young life under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. The operating room doors opened again as hospital administrators entered to witness the conclusion of the historic surgery. Their faces showed a mixture of relief, admiration, and amazement as they realized what they had just witnessed. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan had not only performed a medical miracle, but had done so with a grace and professionalism that elevated the entire medical profession. The surgery was completely successful. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan announced to the observation deck, looking directly at Judge Rosalind Pemberton, "Emma will make a full recovery with proper post-operative care." Judge Rosalind Pemberton tried to speak, to offer thanks or apologies, but no words came. How could she express gratitude to someone she had tried to destroy? How could she apologize for participating in a conspiracy that had cost an innocent woman her freedom and reputation? The magnitude of the injustice she had perpetrated seemed beyond the reach of mere words. Outside the hospital, news crews were setting up for live broadcasts that would carry this story across the nation and around the world. The tale of Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan's vindication and heroism would inspire millions while exposing the corruption that had nearly destroyed her. Judge Rosalind Pemberton's career was over, her reputation in ruins, but justice was finally beginning to emerge from the darkness of conspiracy and prejudice. As Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan was finally freed from the restraints and supervision that had marked her as a convicted criminal, she stood tall in her green scrubs under the bright hospital lights. She had endured the worst that a corrupt system could inflict upon her, yet had emerged with her integrity and skill intact. The truth had indeed set her free, but more importantly, it had allowed her to save a life and prove that justice, though sometimes delayed, could not be permanently denied. The chapter of her wrongful imprisonment was closing, but the story of her vindication and triumph was just beginning to be written in the bright lights of truth and the steady hands of healing. The first rays of dawn filtered through the large windows of Metropolitan General Hospital's recovery wing, casting gentle natural light across the pristine white walls. Emma Pemberton's eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened to reveal confused brown eyes trying to focus on her surroundings. The bright overhead fluorescent lights had been dimmed to allow the morning skylight to provide a softer illumination as she awakened from her medically induced coma. Her mother, Rosalind Pemberton, sat hunched in a chair beside the hospital bed, no longer the commanding figure who had wielded a gavel with such authority just days before. Gone were the imposing black judicial robes that had made her seem larger than life. Instead, she wore a simple red dress that seemed to diminish her presence, making her appear smaller, more vulnerable, more human. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights spent watching her daughter's chest rise and fall with each precious breath. "Mom?" Emma's voice came out as barely a whisper, dry and raspy from the breathing tube that had been removed hours earlier. Rosalind's head snapped up, tears immediately springing to her eyes. "Emma! Oh, sweetheart, you're awake." She reached for her daughter's hand, gripping it gently as if afraid she might break. "How do you feel?" "My head hurts," Emma murmured, trying to lift her hand to touch the surgical site, but finding her movements still sluggish. "What happened to me?" Before Rosalind could answer, there was a soft knock at the door. Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan entered the room wearing her familiar green scrubs and blue jacket, her medical bag in hand. The natural skylight streaming through the windows seemed to illuminate her with an almost ethereal glow, highlighting the quiet strength in her posture and the compassionate intelligence in her dark eyes. Rosalind tensed as the woman she had wronged so terribly approached her daughter's bedside. Just 48 hours ago, she had sentenced this brilliant surgeon to life in prison. Now Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan stood free, vindicated, and responsible for saving the most precious thing in Rosalind's world. "Good morning, Emma," Dr. Al-Hassan said softly, her voice carrying the warm professionalism that had made her beloved by patients and colleagues alike. "I'm Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan. I performed your surgery. How are you feeling?" Emma blinked slowly, trying to process the information. "Surgery? I don't remember." "You had a brain aneurysm," Dr. Al-Hassan explained gently, pulling out a small penlight to check Emma's pupils. "A blood vessel in your brain was damaged and bleeding. We were able to repair it, but you've been unconscious for 2 days while your brain healed." As Dr. Al-Hassan conducted her examination with practiced efficiency, checking Emma's reflexes, cognitive responses, and motor functions, Rosalind watched in fascination and growing shame. Every movement spoke of years of training, dedication, and genuine care for her patients. This was the woman she had dismissed as a criminal, whose life she had destroyed with a single swing of her gavel. "Your recovery is progressing beautifully," Dr. Al-Hassan said, making notes on Emma's chart. "The swelling has gone down significantly, and all your neurological responses are normal. You should make a full recovery." Emma smiled weakly. "Thank you, Dr. Al-Hassan. My mom told me you saved my life." Dr. Al-Hassan's eyes briefly met Rosalind's across the hospital bed. In that moment, the weight of everything that had transpired hung heavy in the air between them. "I'm just glad we were able to help," she said simply. As Dr. Al-Hassan finished her examination and prepared to leave, Rosalind stood abruptly. "Doctor, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Dr. Al-Hassan paused, studying the woman who had sentenced her to life imprisonment. After a long moment, she nodded. "Emma, I'll be back to check on you this evening. Rest now." The two women stepped into the bright hospital corridor, where the overhead fluorescent lights and natural daylight from tall windows created an almost stark honesty. Nurses and doctors moved purposefully through the halls, and several nodded respectfully to Dr. Al-Hassan as they passed, their faces showing genuine happiness at her return. Rosalind struggled to find words, her hands trembling as she faced the magnitude of what she needed to say. "Dr. Al-Hassan, I I don't know how to begin to apologize for what I did to you." "You don't," Dr. Al-Hassan replied quietly, her voice steady but not unkind. "But I have to try," Rosalind continued, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "I let my prejudices, my corruption, my willingness to be part of a system that targeted you because you dared to speak truth to power. I nearly destroyed an innocent woman's life, and in doing so, I almost lost my own daughter." Dr. Al-Hassan listened without interruption as Rosalind's composure completely crumbled. "I spent my entire career believing I was serving justice, but I was just serving my own biases and the corrupt system that benefited people like me. You are everything I should have aspired to be. Your dedication to healing, to serving your community, to standing up for what's right, even when it cost you everything." "Judge Pemberton," Dr. Al-Hassan said softly. "Former judge," Rosalind corrected, wiping her eyes. "I submitted my resignation this morning. It's the least I can do." Dr. Al-Hassan was quiet for a long moment, looking out through one of the tall windows where the morning sun painted everything in golden light. "I won't lie and say what you did didn't hurt me deeply. Being torn away from my patients, my research, my life's work because of lies and prejudice, it nearly broke me." Rosalind's shoulders shook with silent sobs. "But," Dr. Al-Hassan continued, "I took an oath to do no harm, to preserve life whenever possible. That oath doesn't come with conditions about whose life deserves saving. Your daughter needed help, and I was able to provide it. That's what matters." "How can you forgive me?" Rosalind whispered. "How can you show such grace to someone who showed you none?" Dr. Al-Hassan turned to face her fully. "Because holding on to anger would only poison my own heart, because your daughter is innocent of your crimes, and because maybe, just maybe, this experience will prevent you from ever participating in such injustice again." Down the corridor, they could see news crews gathering in the lobby. Word had gotten out about Dr. Al-Hassan's vindication, Detective Kevin Sullivan's arrest, and the dramatic circumstances that had led to the truth coming to light. "The media is calling you a hero," Rosalind said, glancing toward the reporters. "I'm not a hero," Dr. Al-Hassan replied. "I'm just a doctor who did her job. The real heroes are people like my attorney Rachel Goldstein, who never stopped fighting for the truth, and whistleblowers who risk everything to expose corruption." As if summoned by their conversation, Rachel Goldstein appeared at the end of the corridor, her arms full of legal documents and her face beaming with triumph. She approached them, wearing her professional Navy suit, her confidence restored after days of fighting an uphill battle against a corrupt system. "Fatima," she called out, "the FBI wants to meet with you this afternoon. They're building cases against everyone involved in the conspiracy. Detective Sullivan is cooperating fully, and District Attorney Ashworth has been arrested on federal corruption charges." Dr. Al-Hassan nodded, unsurprised by the news. "What about the other cases they may have corrupted?" "That's exactly what they want to discuss with you. Your case has opened the door to reviewing hundreds of potentially wrongful convictions. The entire system is being investigated." Rosalind listened to this exchange with a growing sense of the scope of her complicity. She hadn't just wronged one innocent woman. She had been part of a system that had likely destroyed countless lives. "I'll testify," she said suddenly, causing both women to look at her in surprise. "Against Sullivan, against Ashworth, against anyone who was part of this. I'll tell the truth about everything I know." Rachel studied her carefully. "That could mean criminal charges for you as well." "Good," Rosalind replied firmly. "I deserve whatever consequences come from my actions." Dr. Al-Hassan looked at her with something approaching respect. "That's the first step toward real justice." 3 hours later, Dr. Al-Hassan stood in the conference room where she had been welcomed back by Metropolitan General Hospital's Board of Directors. The room was bright with natural skylight streaming through large windows, and her colleagues sat around the polished table wearing expressions of admiration and relief. Dr. Nathan Kowalski, who had testified on her behalf during the trial, stood and began applauding. Soon the entire room was on their feet, giving her a standing ovation that spoke to the respect and affection her peers held for her. Dr. Al-Hassan, said the chief of staff, an elderly man in a blue jacket, "We want to formally apologize for not doing more to support you during this ordeal. We should have fought harder." "Thank you," Dr. Al-Hassan replied graciously, "but looking backward won't help anyone. I want to look forward, to use this experience to create positive change." She outlined her vision for a foundation that would provide legal assistance to wrongfully convicted individuals, particularly those from underserved communities who lacked resources to fight corrupt systems. The room listened intently as she described partnerships with legal aid organizations, medical professionals who could provide expert testimony, and advocacy groups working for criminal justice reform. "I want to turn this trauma into transformation," she explained, "not just for me, but for everyone who has been failed by a system that was supposed to protect them." By evening, as Dr. Al-Hassan made her final rounds, she stopped by Emma's room once more. The teenager was sitting up in bed, looking much stronger, with her mother beside her, reading from a book. "How are you feeling, Emma?" Dr. Al-Hassan asked, checking the monitors that showed all normal readings. "Much better, thank you," Emma replied. "Dr. Al-Hassan, can I ask you something?" "Of course. My mom told me what she did to you, how wrong she was. I can't believe you still saved my life after that." Dr. Al-Hassan sat on the edge of the bed, her voice gentle but firm. "Emma, you are not responsible for your mother's actions, just as I am not defined by what others do to me. What matters is how we choose to respond, how we choose to treat each other going forward." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I want to help somehow. With your foundation, I mean. When I'm better, I want to volunteer, to help other people who have been treated unfairly." "I would be honored to have your help," Dr. Al-Hassan replied, smiling genuinely for the first time in days. As she prepared to leave, Rosalind walked her to the door. "Dr. Al-Hassan, I know I can never undo what I did, but I want you to know that I will spend whatever time I have left trying to make amends. The best amends you can make is to ensure this never happens to anyone else." Dr. Al-Hassan replied, "Use your knowledge of the system to help fix it." "I will," Rosalind promised. "I swear to you, I will." 6 months later, the Fatima Al-Hassan Foundation for Justice had helped overturn 12 wrongful convictions and was providing legal assistance to dozens more cases. Emma Pemberton, fully recovered from her surgery, had become one of the foundation's most dedicated young volunteers, using her story to illustrate how prejudice and corruption hurt everyone, including those who think they benefit from it. Dr. Al-Hassan returned to her surgical practice, but now her work extended far beyond the operating room. She had become a powerful voice for justice reform, speaking at conferences and working with legislators to create systemic changes that would prevent future wrongful convictions. The corruption that had nearly destroyed her life had been exposed and dismantled, but more importantly, it had been transformed into a force for positive change that would protect countless others from the same injustice. In the end, justice had been restored not just for Dr. Fatima Al-Hassan, but for everyone who would benefit from the changes her courage and grace had set in motion. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.